Welcome to Wrestle War!
What you gonna do when the happy little games run wild on you? I have been a pro wrestling fan for a very long time. What really got me into watching the action inside the squared circle was Hulk Hogan and Rowdy Piper back in 1984. I have attended a number of live events over the years, with the first one being at a show at the Wharton Fieldhouse in Moline, Illinois, in which the Killer Bees wrestled against the Hart Foundation. The reason this one sticks out in my mind is because I finally got to see these larger-than-life characters that I had been watching on my tiny black and white TV in living color for the first time. Also, a fan jumped in the ring and attacked Jim the Anvil Neidhart, which, to be honest, did not work out too well for the fan, because not only did the cops come in and beat the crap out of the guy with their nightclubs, but the Anvil got a few kicks in as well. After this incident, I was hooked. I've attended probably 40 or 50 live events, including a few major shows such as Chi-Town Rumble '89, where Ric Flair lost the title to Ricky Steamboat, Starrcade '87, when Ric Flair won the title from Ronnie Garvin, and the Great American Bash 1997, which you can see me in the front row holding up my artwork of Ric Flair relieving himself all over Hulk Hogan. Also seated next to me and appearing for the first time ever in one of my videos is Mrs. Patman QC. You can't see her even though she's standing on a chair. Something else that you people may or may not know is that I also really love video games. I literally grew up in a bowling alley, starting with pinball machines and then moving on to Space Invaders from there. So in the mid-1980s, when the first professional wrestling video game was unleashed, I was hooked like a newborn baby to a mother's teat. Today, we are taking a look at one of Sega's entries into the wrestling video game market, which would be 1989's Wrestle War. What famous Japanese star was going to be in the game but pressured Sega into removing him? So lace up your boots and watch out for the chops, because this is the history of Sega's Wrestle War. The first arcade wrestling game to come along would be thanks to Technos Japan. It was released in 1983 as The Big Pro Wrestling, or Tag Team Wrestling here in the States. It was strictly a tag team affair, but it did offer a lot of moves and was ported to a number of systems.
Come on! Come on!
The following year, Sega decided to throw their hat into the ring with the arcade game Apoo. This featured a fully fictionalized cast of characters who, just coincidentally enough, happened to look just like real-life wrestlers. This would be a common trait among Japanese video games for a number of years. The gameplay is a lot like tag team wrestling, with the action being able to spill to the outside, but the controls are a bit more clunky and are not quite as tight as you would expect from later entries into the arcade wrestling scene. In 1985, Sega tried again with the arcade title Champion Pro Wrestling, which is even more of a direct clone of tag team wrestling than their previous attempt. You take control of the unnamed tag team of Antonio Inoki and Hulk Hogan as you set out to win the World Tag Team Championships. The playability is a bit odd in which you have to select what move to perform, and it's carried out on the screen depending on your position to your opponent. Gameplay-wise, it really reminded me of the NES and Commodore 64 versions of tag team wrestling. In 1986, third time was the charm for Sega as they released Body Slam into Japanese arcades. This was a tag team only slugfest featuring the women of All Japan Pro Wrestling. Your usual kicks and punches are here, but once your opponent is weak enough, you can do an assortment of moves such as body slams and pile drivers. There were even a few submissions thrown in as well. Also, weapons are available in certain situations. When the game was released here in the States on the Sega Master System, the females were replaced with generic males who now have a super deformed look. Gameplay-wise, it's an okay conversion, but I prefer the arcade original. After a few years hiatus, Sega would once again enter the arcade squared circle with 1989's Wrestle War. You take on the role of Bruce Blade as he climbs rung by rung up the ladder of success on his way to becoming the World Heavyweight Champion. You start at the bottom, squaring off against lower tier talents with the best fictionalized roster this side of Fire Pro Wrestling. You are essentially on a tour of the territories, traveling around the United States and defeating each wrestler. The first thing you notice upon starting up the game is how large and colorful the sprites are. They are absolutely huge and have excellent facial expressions, and there is no problem at all telling exactly who each fictional wrestler is clearly based on. The only wrestler I could not identify was the first wrestler in the game, who is the Mohawk Kid. More on him later though. The controls are fairly simple with a punch button and a kick button. You use these to stun your opponent, which after a few kicks or punches, a grapple animation is shown and a power bar flashes on the screen. You press the buttons as fast as you can in order to win the grapple and perform your move. You do have a few moves at your disposal, such as body slams, suplexes, and pile drivers. The move unleashed will also depend on how weak your opponent is and also your placement to him. You can Irish whip your opponent and do either a clothesline or dropkick depending on their position. The action can spill out of the ring, where you can also do moves such as the devastating pile driver on the floor. At certain locations, weapons such as the ring bell and steel chairs are also available for you to use. If you get your opponent weak enough and a grapple is initiated, you can perform your super move, which is a super jumping pile driver that would make Paul Orndorff proud. One notable omission from the game is the lack of top rope maneuvers. In the words of the immoral Hulk Hogan,
"At my age, my feet don't leave the ground."
The movesets of the various wrestlers you face are pretty accurate to their real-life iteration. Don Dambuster, who is based on Road Warrior Hawk, has his press slam and jumping fist drop. Titan Morgan, who is based on Hulk Hogan, has his signature leg drop. Mad Dog, who is based on Mil Mascaras, has a suicide dive to the outside, etc. Enough can't be said about the graphic presentation. This feels like you're watching a television broadcast of WWF superstars. Before certain matches, your opponent is being interviewed, where he will lay the verbal smackdown on you with crystal clear speech. During the first interview segment, you even have a manager standing next to you who looks very similar to Bobby the Brain Heenan. It's a nice little touch for video game wrestling geeks everywhere.
I can't wait to see you go down. I'm gonna kick you round the ring and blow your brains out. Lo and behold, the true heavyweight champion of the world. You're going to find out who's the master.
I'm so proud of him.
Along with the excellent voice work, the sound effects are great, with loud, bone-crunching snaps and signature grunts and groans typical of a standard wrestling game. The crowd even becomes involved, telling you to get up and also calling you a coward. When you pull off your super move, the audible gasp of the crowd really adds to the immersion of the game. One thing that does take some getting used to is if you are playing it for the first time is the viewpoint of the game. It's always aligned behind the player no matter where you are located at, causing the entire screen to shift non-stop to align itself. After you play it for a few minutes, you tend to get used to it, but for the first time it's a bit distracting. The 8 wrestlers you encounter in your championship quest are Mohawk Kid, Sledgehammer, who was based on Bruiser Brody, Mr. J looks to be a combination of a couple of different characters. The primary inspiration would be Jason the Terrible. However, the game was released in 1989, right at the height of Batmania, and as you can see from the footage, Mr. J also has green hair and a purple bodysuit, so it could be a nod to the clown prince of crime, the Joker. One other thing of note when mentioning Jason the Terrible, after you defeat the wrestler, there's a shot of your character holding his mask over your head. Underneath the mask, he appears to be a robot. This always reminded me of the $6 Million Man TV show when he would square off against the robots. Don Dambuster, who was based on Road Warrior Hawk, Mad Dog, who was based on Mil Mascaras, Titan Morgan, who was based on Hulk Hogan, Buckskin Rogers, who was based on Stan Hansen, and finally Grand Kong, who was based on Abdullah the Butcher, complete with scarred forehead. Although the face is a dead ringer for Abby, the body is not unless the character went on the Jenny Craig diet and lost about 600 pounds. If you're able to defeat all of these wrestlers, you celebrate by pouring warm sake or cold beer all over your head. After this, the 8 characters are shown standing up side by side and you knock them over as if they were dominoes. Once this is over, the credits roll and the game is over. The final boss of the game was going to be Giant Baba. Plans were changed when Sega was looking at the possibility of doing an All Japan Pro Wrestling game and decided to take him out as a sign of goodwill. There was only one conversion available, and that was for the Mega Drive in Japan and Europe. Both versions featured different box art, with the Japanese versions possibly shedding some light on who the mysterious Mohawk Kid really is based on. As you can see from the box art, we have Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Road Warrior Hawk, Abdullah the Butcher, and the immoral Hulk Hogan front and center. If you look a little closer, you'll see the Ultimate Warrior's body wearing a Jason mask. The only person on the front with a mohawk who could only be the Mohawk Kid is clearly Bushwhacker Luke from the WWF. Once the game was released in Europe, the box art was changed to a generic wrestler on the cover with the same pose. The Mega Drive conversion was released in 1991 and didn't turn out too bad. When you first turn the game on, you are greeted with some pretty clear speech from the arcade game. For some reason, the main character is no longer a blue-eyed, blonde-haired babyface, but instead looks more like Bruce Wayne if he decided to stop dressing up as a flying rodent and stepped into the squared circle. The sprites are nice and beefy and not even the slightest bit of queefy. From the looks of them, they've definitely been taking their Hulk Hogan vitamins. Presentation-wise, it looks pretty faithful to the arcade game minus some of the bells and whistles. The referee is missing and so is the crowd for some odd reason. The interview segments in between each match are also missing, replaced with a text bubble on a generic map of the USA. This is kind of cool though, because it shows you all the different territories you are traveling through. Even though the sprites are extra large, they are still animated fairly well. The screen still does the horizontal shift similar to the arcade game, although not quite as smooth. The playability is very good and feels like the arcade original, although obviously scaled back. Move-wise, everything from the arcade game is here, including the Super Pile Driver. There is a 2-player mode as well, in which the second player can pick any wrestler in the game. For whatever reason, the game was not released here in the States, which for a Yankee like me, really sucked. The game was finally released over here in the States as part of the Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 for the Dreamcast. One notable change is the main character is back to being his blue-eyed, blonde-haired self. Wrestle War has always been one of my favorite arcade wrestling titles. Yes, there are far better wrestling games available now, but back in 1989, this was the cream of the crop, at least until WWF Superstars and WWF WrestleFest came along. The game is still fun to play, especially with the over-exaggerated movesets and graphics. If you've never had a chance to step into the squared circle and stomp a mud hole into somebody and walk it dry, give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. Thanks everybody for watching.